Okay, so having some way of being able to sort through all of the risks that you've identified and figure out which ones of the risks you actually need to really be focusing on, thinking of ways that you can proactively keep these risks from occurring, and thinking through, okay, if this risk does occur, then what's our reaction to it going to be? What type of response plan can we put in place so that this doesn't catch us completely unprepared? That's what risk analysis allows you to do, and that's what the qualitative risk analysis we're about to talk about is. Now, of qualitative and quantitative risk analysis, the one that you see most commonly in practice by far is this qualitative risk analysis. I I've had no direct experience with the conduct of quantitative risk analysis as it relates to project management. Now, I think that there are probably some industries where this would be more likely than others, and IT really isn't one of those industries. At least, not that I've seen, nor have I heard with the different organizations that I belong to about a heck of a lot of this going on. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but I think qualitative is certainly the bigger of the two. So when you're performing a qualitative risk analysis, what you're doing is you're thinking about risks, and you're thinking about it along two different lines. Number one, for any particular risk, what is its likelihood of occurring? Because you're going to want to pay attention to the risks that have a greater likelihood of occurring as opposed to less of a likelihood of occurring. If you through the analysis process, the project teams decide, you know what, this particular risk has, there's less than a 1% chance that this is actually going to happen. Well, then that's probably where people don't need to be spending a lot of time focusing mental energy on things that have such a small probability of occurring. I don't spend all day I might buy a lottery ticket, but I don't spend all day every day focusing on what I'm going to do if I win the lottery, because it has such a tiny chance of occurring. It's just not. I got other things I got to focus on. So, how likely is something to occur? The next thing is what is the impact of the event should it occur? Is it an impact that's going is it something that's going to have a high degree of impact or a low degree of impact? Um, you know, if I win the lottery, that's going to have an incredible amount of impact. That's a huge deal. And typically, and when you're looking at this type of analysis, you're going to want to pay more attention to those things that are going to have a bigger impact on your project. However, winning the lottery, yes, it's really high impact, but it is infinitesimally small probability of happening. So it's not going to be a place where you focus. It's not a place where I focus on that risk just in personal life. But let's think about it in terms of, let's go back to the wedding example and think about performing, where you would choose to focus your efforts. Again, if you plan to have an outdoor wedding, um, well, then weather is going to be a big risk. What is the likelihood that the weather is going to be bad on the particular day that the wedding is scheduled? It's 50-50. I mean, for the vast majority of the time that you're planning this event, you can't assign it any value more than 50-50. So it's right there in the middle in terms of the probability of its occurrence. What is its impact? The potential impact on the event? Well, it's a big deal. It's a little hard to get married in the pouring down rain, or to expect guests to come. It's it's a big deal. So that's a risk that when you're early on in your planning phase, I mean, it's one of the first ones that you're going to identify. It's also one that you're going to want to think about, because it has, if it doesn't have a high degree of of a probability of occurrence, meaning greater than 50%. I mean, it at least it's a one. The odds are 1 to 1 that this is going to happen. So it's one that you want to keep on your radar. And it's also, it has a high probability of occurrence and a high degree of impact on the outcome of your project. So that's one that's a risk that you're going to want to keep pretty high up on your radar and make sure that you do effectively address and come up with a risk response plan so that you can still have what you want. Now, I know what another example of a risk that maybe you wouldn't pay as much attention to. This actually happened to a friend of mine. She booked a band for her wedding reception, and the band didn't show. The probability that you are going to book a band and that the band's not going to show up, that is a risk. What is the likelihood of that risk occurring? That's reasonably low. That's of all the weddings I've ever been to and ever been involved in, that's the only time in my experience that I can ever say that anybody hired a vendor to handle any part of the wedding and that vendor just smooth didn't show to do it. So the likelihood that they're just not going to show up is low. The impact on the event. Was it a bummer that there was no music at the reception? Yeah, it was a bummer. But it still didn't stop the reception from taking place. There was still food. There was still a location for the reception. There were still, people could still come in. They could visit with one another. They could pay their respects to the bride and groom. The reception didn't stop because the band didn't show. So as it goes, that's an example of a risk that has a low probability of occurring and a low degree of impact. So it's going to be something that you pay less attention to relative to other things as you're going through the planning process. So those are just a couple of examples of qualitative risk analysis. The main thing to take away from it is that when you categorize all of your risks along those two dimensions, the ones that you're going to want to pay more attention to and place greater emphasis on are the ones that have a high probability of occurring and have a high degree of impact on your project. That's where the attention should go.